ones?
I loved your last question.
Which one?
About the right to...
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I'm not going to hang around because we actually have a slightly shortened session. So I'm not going to sort of reintroduce and remind you what we're doing, because that's just been expertly done for us. I think what's really important at this point is just to lay out that the guns will go silent at some point. 2.5 months in, it probably doesn't feel that way for those who are living in Gaza, whose lives are shattered, whose families have been destroyed. And we know that that moment is further away than we all might have hoped with the US veto of a ceasefire last Friday at the UN. We see how the UN is rendered, frankly, useless in trying to bring an end to this crisis in the very short term. But whether it's days or whether it's weeks, this crisis, this conflict, this war will end. And when it does, what does the day after look like? That is what we want to discuss over the next 35, 40 minutes. It's absolutely fantastic to have the panel with me here, which has got such a sort of diverse and global perspective, you know, and includes key players in what has been going on. So let's just let's get straight to it. Let's start with the Palestinian perspective here. As you are from Gaza, you have family there, you've lost family there, and I know I will share this audience's thoughts when we say we share your pain, and I am so sorry. Tell me, what are you hearing on the ground about what is going on now, how a Gaza will be governed going forward? Hamas must be and has to be a very weakened group. So what does a day after look like from your perspective?
Thank you, Becky, and the thanks and gratitude is extended to Qatar and the Doha Forum for this very much needed space for a much needed conversation. Yes, I am from Palestine, from Gaza. I've lost many members of my own extended family from both sides. From my father's side and mother's side, almost an equal number. This is the first time Israel applies the concept of equality, or in terms of its mass murder of our people. The issue in Gaza is not just the 17,000 who were slaughtered live on TV. This is the first industrial scale murder that you see on your TV sets, nor even the utter destruction of several infrastructures. You're talking about more than 60% of Gaza. And not just homes or hospitals or schools and universities. Ancient structure that does not only belong to us, the Palestinians, it belongs to you, belongs to the world. Like the third oldest church on earth. Like one of the oldest mosques, Al-Umari Mosque in Gaza. These are crimes against humanity. The issue in Gaza that I follow every day is not just the slaughter, the mass murder. It's the mass degradation, humiliation of an entire nation. Think of fathers and mothers who are unable to provide basic. Think of a mother that her child, because disease is spreading, has diarrhea. There is no way in Gaza that you can provide these very basic. And you're talking about almost 2 million people displaced now. they are still being bombed in the south, and B, they know they have nowhere to go back to in the north. Israel has made sure that the entire area of the north, which is the majority of Gaza in terms of population and size, is simply unlivable. Back to your question, Becky, about the day after. Allow me to say here is that I hear this discussion in political and policy forums about the day after, and I think it's a mistake. It's a big mistake to talk about the day after. Some do it with good intentions, some do it with bad intentions, but both are wrong. We need to talk about today, about the need for a permanent, comprehensive ceasefire, because every day will cost us dearly. Already, the situation is beyond containing. Second, we need to talk about the day before, not the day after. The day before. And we need to focus our entire conversation about the siege, the settlements, the violence, the apartheid system, the Netanyahu agenda that has been lasting for 25 years, that was clear, the undermining of any possibility of a two-state solution, the coalition in Israel that includes people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. I don't need to tell you who these supremacists are. We really need to focus solely on the day before. And from there, think about the structures we have, think about the failures we have witnessed, and see how can we go on from there. And I have a lot to offer, but I don't want to go on.
Thank you. We will talk about the day after, and I know you're prepared to do that, but you're making your point is well taken about a ceasefire now and why we are where we are at. Mohammed, let me bring you in here. I think it's important to be clear about how this status quo policy of containment, effectively, on Israel's part, containment of a group, political but military group who is a threat to Israel's security, has been effective for so long. Can you explain Qatar's year-long policy of making payments into Gaza to a group that is opposed to Israel's existence, and what that money was for, and whether Israel actively encouraged those payments to continue, actively encouraged those payments until as late as September of this year? I think it's just important because, firstly, you know, Qatar has taken some criticism about what its role is, and I want you to be absolutely clear about that. And then I think it's important that we talk about this when we are looking to provide a platform to talk about what happens next. Sir.
Well, thank you so much, Becky, and welcome back. And I would like also to take this opportunity to welcome all of our guests to the Doha Forum. It's a very important opportunity for us to meet, discuss, and collaborate about these very important topics that affects all of us in the region. You're asking a very specific question that we've been asked several times in the past, and it's important to highlight that Palestine occupies a very important position in our foreign affairs agenda. It always has been the number one Arab case on our agenda, and therefore it's important for us to contribute with the international community as much as we can to help and support the Palestinian people. That's what we have been doing, and that's what we'll continue to do. We've been very transparent since day one when it comes to providing humanitarian aid, helping the people in Gaza, and building up the infrastructure over there. It all has been in direct coordination with our international partners, and including the UN, that we have shared projects that we have managed, and we're quite proud of the work that we have done so far to the people in Gaza. And this is not something that we're asking them in return to pay us back. This is our obligations, our duty to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. And we will continue to do that. The accusations are continuous on Qatar, which is quite normal. I could say that today we're immune of hearing a lot of those false and baseless accusations that has specific targets to achieve. Gladly, we were focused, we were dedicated about this case, And Becky, we've engaged in this case since day one. And we've shown to the world that Qatar speaks with action. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not about stating your position or your political opinion about a case, but we've taken the next step by playing an effective role in the peacemaking process.
And Israel has been in agreement of the process that has happened and has encouraged the status quo, as I understand it, in the past.
We're in direct coordination with all of the important stakeholders. It's essential for us to keep them in the loop and to have a direct communications with them related to our intention, our projects, and our objectives. And that's what we've been doing.
Can the status quo continue? Because that is the conversation that we're going to have here. And if not, what tomorrow looks like. But the status quo very specifically, which is money from here going into Gaza to support the payment of government salaries and the rest of it. If that is the status quo at present, can it continue?
We're not going to change our mandate. Our mandate is our continuous help and support for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. We will continue to do it systematically as we did it before. We will continue to engage with regional and international partners to make sure that those funds reach out to the most vulnerables and to the important and vital infrastructure. Our work, Vicky, has been quite known in helping and supporting the health sector, the educational infrastructure over there in Palestine, and help the education within the Palestinian people. So it's very essential to highlight those issues, as we've been doing all over the region. It's not only in Gaza specifically, but all of our region as work has been quite systematic.
Would you agree, though, at present, and I'm going to open this up, would you agree at present that what we see today in Gaza is unsustainable, and that the conversation we're having now is a conversation that needs to be held, which is what needs to happen next for the 2 million people in Gaza whose lives are shattered at present, what needs to happen in the short term, and then the wider story here is what is the Palestinian horizon going forward, and how is that included in any leadership conversations going forward?
So I totally agree with my colleague, the ambassador, that it's very important that we put a priority list. And the first point that stands at the top of the priority list right now is how to deal with the current situation. Becky, we cannot deal and think and work coordinately when it comes to the political solution of the Palestinian case, which we've been calling for quite a long time, without finding a resolution to the current situation that is happening right now in Gaza. What we were thinking is that a ceasefire is a must, and I have to be honest, we were quite disappointed that the Security Council failed to secure this important outcome, in spite of the fact that the UNSG has invoked Article 99 by calling for the Security Council to take that decision.
Well, let's bring in our Chinese perspective here, sir, because I think it's very important. Let's stick to where we are at present. China holds the revolving presidency of the UN Security Council at present and is a P5 member. It has a long-standing position with regard to a two-state solution for the Palestinians. What is China's role here in affecting in the short term, because we have to have that conversation, how do we stop the guns at this point? So how can Beijing play a role in the very short term, and what is Beijing's perspective on the longer term vision here?
Thank you, Becky. And I think that this is excellent. I mean, Doha Forum is really talking these urgent, burning issues here. We gather all the bright minds here. What I think Beijing can do is actually, China is a country that has always friendly with this part of the world. And it's the largest trading partner for all the, Arab countries, and the second largest of Israel. And so I think that it's very unfortunate that we see this part of the world is really getting into crisis now. And what I think is actually important is that China, of course, is very actively promoting the peace. Well, China was at a rotating chair of the Security Council. China actually proposed to stop that, and it's very unfortunate we see this UN Security Council resolution vetoed by one country, basically, to stop the ceasefire, which is very, very sad to see that. It's a common sense. It's common, really, human nature that we want to see the war stopped. Of course, China against all violence. I mean, two wrong doesn't make one right. But But currently, talk about urgently, we need to stop this humanitarian crisis and stop losing the life and children and women and suffering of the people. So I think it's extremely important that we stop that, and China can use whatever it can to promote that. China said very clearly, China wants to see the, a peace, stop the ceasefire, and of course, protecting the humanitarian, aid, and also protect the civilians, and of course, extensify the diplomatic intervention. And also, let's call a peace summit of some kind. Let's get all the countries again. We should immediately call another meeting to really talk about those common threat and saving moment to really stop this bloodshed. So I think it's extremely important that China can do more.
Let me just press you on this. I mean, we heard the SG's words about the position of the UN Security Council. I mean, he says he will continue to press, but he's clearly extremely frustrated and disappointed about the lack of momentum for any solution out of the UNSC at present. China's got a responsibility. It holds a revolving presidency at present and is a P5 member. So what more can be done at that multilateral sort of institutional level?
Absolutely. I think that it's very unfortunate to see that the trust between the major countries, particularly the Security Council, is eroding. And particularly China has done that. I mean, China is the largest peace-sending keeping force of the P5 countries. So we could, if necessary, we could send peacekeeping forces to Gaza if necessary. I think UN has to do something. UN Security Council has to, again, call for urgent meetings to really stop that. I think that's really, we can't wait this bloodshed to continue.
Daniel, let me bring you in. Let's talk about what's happening now and then what happens next. Benjamin Netanyahu has never publicly addressed these accusations that a policy of containment, of keeping Gaza quiet, suited his aims. What is his calculus at present? We know absolutely categorically rejects a ceasefire until he says Hamas is destroyed and all the hostages are freed. So that's in the first instance. What's the calculus at this point? And then what happens next?
Well, thankfully, Becky, that's a headspace I don't occupy. But let me start by thanking the organizers, Qatar and the Doha Forum, and, of course, the Qatari mediation efforts. I think something is clear, which is that Netanyahu is not looking forward to the morning after, because that's when one will face the music for what happened. I also think that we've not been paying attention to what he and his coalition have been saying. So first of all, yes, we can speak about the morning after, but as Hussam said, this can still get worse. It's getting worse every day. Every day that this doesn't end, not only the proximate causes of death from the Israeli military operation, but also the gathering an already devastating humanitarian catastrophe. So this can get worse in Gaza. And when you look at Netanyahu's policy and his government, mass displacement is still on the agenda today. And that doesn't just apply to Gaza. The provocations in the West Bank and East Jerusalem will continue. And the structural discrimination, and it's getting worse, against the Palestinian citizens of Israel is still there. To me, that suggests there are three lessons for the now and for the morning after. The first lesson is when you have a government which says there's only rights for one people in this land, where there are senior ministers who say we're for ethnic cleansing, we're eradicationists. When you have a designation made, not just by Palestinians, but by Israeli human rights defenders and the blue chip international organizations, that this meets the legal definition of apartheid, you take that seriously, and this is a time to mobilize, not normalize. Now, the second thing I would say is, and this is crucial for Netanyahu's calculation, this gets worse the more it is indulged. So if you treat what Israel is doing with impunity, if, for instance, you provide more weapons, more vetoes at the UN Security Council, then Israel will do its worst. And in this respect, Israel's not some kind of aberrant actor. That's what happens in circumstances like this. So you have to introduce accountability. there has to be, if you want the Israeli direction of travel, because yes, this government is an extreme iteration, but the trajectory that we have been on has been quite constant. If you want to change that trajectory, then you have to introduce costs and consequences, a different cost-benefit calculation. And that takes you to the third thing, which is the US is clearly woefully inadequate at that task, right? But there's another thing, and we just heard our Chinese friend. The idea that this should be a US monopolistic exercise is out of sync with the world we live in today, with contemporary geopolitics. So, you know, Becky, it's interesting, for someone who works on this issue, it's often, oh wow, you do Israel-Palestine, that's interesting, as if it exists on a different planet. But now it's at the heart of what some people have called the polycrisis. And you see that those who have been lecturing everyone about international law and international humanitarian law are at the forefront today of undermining those things. For those who stuck around yesterday evening, we had an interesting example of it, let's say, from the podium late in the day. We see that this can also metastasize into a crisis of global shipping lanes, of the global economy, the global architecture of the UN. So we have to apply this shifting geopolitics also to the question of Palestine-Israel. And in that respect, something important and interesting has happened, and perhaps even a source of some hope, which is we've seen that for so much of the so-called global south and in many cities in the west, Palestine now occupies this kind of symbolic space of and it's a kind of avatar of a rebellion against Western hypocrisy, against this unacceptable global order, and against the post-colonial order. And let me say this, because in many societies we are seeing at one and the same time a rise in both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And by that I mean actual anti-Semitism, not when people are stigmatized and unjustly accused of anti-Semitism for criticizing Israel. And I think it's crucial that we don't go there, that we find the common humanity. And if I may, it is so important to me that there are Jewish voices who are saying not in my name, who are saying the Jewish tradition is also a universal tradition. Because this can't be zero-sum. This can't be a religious war. And it's not in my name.
Thank you, Daniel. Comfort, I'm going to come to you, but just momentarily, because there was just, we were just talking there about needing to ensure that there's some accountability, needing to ensure that this, can't continue. One of the ways that this will continue is if the US continues to provide munitions to Israel. And Mohammed, the State Department has bypassed Congress to approve the sale and transfer of thousands of munitions to Israel. Reports suggest that the Iranian defense minister has actually asked Qatar to impose restrictions on the US sending weapons from its bases in your country to Israel. I ask you this as a very direct question, and you would expect me to ask you, because it informs the wider discussion here about whether this can physically go on for much longer. Sir, your response?
I just noticed that all of the direct questions are sent to me, Becky. Thank you so much. No, I agree with you about the complication of the issue. And since the first hour of this conflict, we've managed to establish a task force in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to oversee these very important issues. And one of the main objectives of this task force is to make sure that we work with international communities not to expand this conflict beyond its borders. And by that I mean that the other regional or international forces does not aggravate the kind of situation, does not increase the tension within this issue, but should help towards the de-escalation of that issue. Now, I understand that we have a lot of scenarios and a lot of examples that we've seen in the past days when it comes to the situation of Palestine, and how people have been doing, or countries have been doing, dealing with this issue. It's very important that we send those messages out very clearly. Any force that will aggravate the situation over there will even further complicate the mediation role and will further complicate the resolution of that issue. And therefore, it is not for the better cause, it's not for the good cause to aggravate and increase the tensions in general, including the regional countries, And therefore, we played a role as a state of Qatar during the past few days to make sure that we deliver those messages as clear as possible. Let us coordinate, not to work solo towards those conflicts that may aggravate the situation over there. And without naming any specific country, we've been contacting many of the regional countries and the international countries that it's essential for us to coordinate in that case rather than having any sort of aggressions towards the situation.
So you have very specifically had a conversation with the United States, with
we're having we're having a conversation with all. We're having a conversation with the United States. We're having a conversation with Iran. We're having a conversation with all of the regional countries, especially the important stakeholders, international stakeholders, to this case, of the importance for us to unite, to discuss, to deliberate, to be transparent in discussing the details and the elements of this case to move any aggression that may aggravate the situation currently.
Comfort, let me bring you in. Thank you for partly answering my question. Comfort, let me bring you in. I do want to get your perspective, if you will. It's kind of a wider question. The point of this panel is to talk about, how the multilateral system effectively has been rendered pretty much useless over not just this conflict, but over years of UN resolutions which have just been ignored by parties, or a party in this conflict, and what political leadership might look like going forward. Just give us your assessment of what you see.
Thank you very much, Becky, and I want to thank Doha and Qatar especially for welcoming us to the Doha Forum as well. And I want to attach myself to the good points that Daniel has said. Becky, by the way, we shouldn't miss what our friend from China said, which for me is a headline moment, when he suggested that as a P5 country, that China would contemplate a peacekeeping force, and we should interrogate that further, given that one of the crises that we see today is a crisis of peacekeeping. But you're right, Becky, that today we are confronted with, and I was listening very carefully to what Guy Ryder was saying, but not only are we on the verge of a crisis in multilateralism, but I think right at the top of that is a crisis of peacemaking in itself. And Gaza, I think, typifies that crisis that we're seeing. And it's not a surprise that we saw yet again another veto in the Security Council. It's not a surprise, again, that we've seen that the Security Council has become increasingly dysfunctional. And it's not a surprise that much of the answers that people are looking for today in terms of peace and security, in terms of conflict resolution, lies outside of the Security Council chamber. That didn't start today in the name of Israel and Palestine. That didn't start as a result of Gaza. It was there already with Ukraine, and it was there before Ukraine. This just further exacerbates that. This further shines a spotlight of how multilateralism itself is in a state of crisis. This further exacerbates why there's a lack of leadership. But at the same time, Becky, I think we should pause and reflect a little bit. You keep talking about the day after. It's hard to conceive of the day after because we don't know what Gaza is going to look like when the war stops. It's going to be hard to determine what is left of Gaza. There may not be anything left of Gaza as we speak. The longer this war goes on, the more difficult it begins to understand what a political horizon looks like. Daniel, you're quite right to put a spotlight on the choices that Washington has taken. There will be a day of reckoning for the United States. There will also be a day of reckoning for the United Nations in itself. But there will also be a day of reckoning for others who have allowed, sat on the altar of Gaza, sat on the altar of the two-state solutions without doing the hard work of what it is to get us to that moment as well. Diplomacy itself has been exposed, quite rightly, on the altar of 2.3 million people as well.
Thank you. Sam, let me bring you back in here, because you have spent your entire working life pursuing a political horizon for Palestinians, pursuing a solution, and we are, whether we like it or not, on this panel today, we are looking at some discussions about what happens next. The Palestinian Authority, we talked to the Prime Minister here on the stage yesterday about conversations that are being had about a PA platform or a PLO platform for leadership in both Gaza and for the wider Palestinian effort going forward. What do you make of where we are at? Conversations about Hamas playing a junior role in any governing going forward. I mean, just explain what your position is. And given the ineffective and inefficient Palestinian Authority to date, and you I know will argue why that is. You know, what does a Palestinian Authority or its ilk need to look like going forward to achieve a Palestinian horizon?
Well, we just need to empower the existing Palestinian national institutions. We have the State of Palestine. It is recognized by the State of Qatar and the majority of the world, 141 countries. We have a seat in the United Nations, and thanks to the US veto, it's a non-member state, but it's a state. It's a state. That state has a government. That government is the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, not the PA. When we went to the UN, and I was part of the delegation in 2012 to the General Assembly, submitting our request, our application to the UN General Secretary, we specified in that application that it is the PLO that is the government of the State of Palestine, because the PLO represents the entire Palestinian people, inside and outside. And the PLO has the legitimacy. Nationally, there's no one Palestinian that challenges the legitimacy and representation of the PLO. That includes Hamas, by the way. So all what we need to do is to empower the existing institutions, that's number one, and to stop talking about Gaza in a partial, selective situation or from a military and security arrangement or all that piecemeal approach or the interim arrangements. That ain't gonna happen. The status quo ante is over. The State of Palestine, and with its government, has the mandate to protect its people, to provide for its people, to lead the massive humanitarian and reconstruction efforts, to lead the accountability. That's why the State of Palestine referred our territory to the ICC for many years now. And you know why the ICC is dragging its feet. Let's not go there. So we have the structures. We need to empower these structures. And we must leave the issue of who leads, who governs, to the Palestinian people. This is.
In doing
do
so,
not intervene. Do not discuss. There was never in our history a Palestinian president or leader who was not elected and chosen by his people, and there shall never be. Only the Palestinian people will decide upon that, but we do have the structures. And if we want to focus on anything to be done right now, we need to talk to the US and the UK to do one thing now. Not to mediate, because they are not able to do so, given the voting in the Security Council, but to recognize the State of Palestine. That will qualify them to be party and part of the conversation and on the table. Number two, I'm sorry, Becky, without recognizing the two states, stop giving me lip service about the two states. Okay? Stop. Enough. Recognize. And particularly where I'm serving here now, I mean in the UK, because the United Kingdom, Great Britain, has contributed to the situation that we live today. It is the Balfour Declaration. 106 years ago that has promised our land with that colonial arrogance without consulting us and turned us, the natives who lived in the land for millennia, the cradle of civilization, the birthplace of Christianity, turned us into non-Jewish minorities, denying us our peoplehood. And then later the mandate, the British mandate, denied us our right of self-determination, our statehood. Therefore, yes, this is a global issue. It was started by global powers and continued by the US. So the recognition of the Palestinian right to self-determination is a precondition for any international actor to act and to be part of the solution. And we need to regain the global order. I'm sorry, Becky, because what happened in the last few weeks did not just affect Palestinians. That's why you have the hundreds of thousands, the millions in the streets of London, Manchester, Glasgow, Cardiff, and all over the world. Because everybody now realizes this is no longer about the Palestinians only. This is about every and each one of them. This is about their global rules. What is the global order? I'm sorry, Becky. What is the idea of the post-World War II global order? Three things. War should never be a first option, Security Council. Second, should it be an option, there are rules, the Geneva Conventions, and there should be accountability for war crimes. Israel has literally demolished, right live on camera, all these rules. Furthermore, the normalization of mass murder of children and women and mass destruction of civilian structures, hospitals, is going to haunt our humanity. So this is a moment when we regain that order. And what is the problem in that order? Is it the rules? No. Is it the policy? There is a consensus on the two-state solution. Is there one country in the world that does not call for the two-state solution, Daniel? There is a consensus. The problem is not in policy or rules and laws. The problem is in politics. I'll end here. In politics. And let's pinpoint it. The politics of certain world powers, particularly the US, is the issue that we need to focus on. And I don't think we should throw the baby with the bathtub now. We need to regain that, regain some regional balance, and there is a consensus in the region now. Block the Netanyahu agenda, because some were dancing around his agenda in the last few years, and go forward to see how can we move this moment. Listen, Becky, what I have witnessed in the last few weeks is unprecedented. The massive energy that is gathering. It does remind me of the anti-apartheid movement about South Africa. We can turn this moment into a historic moment that really turned this tragedy into the biggest opportunity to go all the way to liberation and ending the occupation, because the people of the world are going to suck oxygen out of this occupation, out of this colonization, out of this besiegement of our entire people, out of the racism that we have lived for 75 years.
Ambassador, thank you. And I know that you could see the clock ticking down while you were talking there, but the time was yours. The platform is yours equally with everybody else. And I do know that I just want to bring Daniel in for a final word. I am going to steal a little bit more time from the agenda setters here, because I do want everybody else just to have a final word. But thank you. Points very well taken. Daniel.
Just to say, Hussam, I agree. If there's seriousness about two states, then there should be recognition. There should be an imposition of that reality. But two cautionary tales. One, be careful what you wish for in terms of what may be considered as constituting two states. I think there has been drift in that, and it needs to be pulled back. But another cautionary tale is the thing that is most egregious. We have to question, is it the absence of a state, or is it the existence of a reality in which people are treated with a system of structural violence and inequality? And I think the message from the world should be, we have supported two states, but the one thing we cannot accept is this ongoing denial of rights. And if Palestinians eventually choose, and others choose, that partition is not going to be the way forward and equality is the way forward, then we should have an open mind to this outcome as well.
Final word.
Yeah, thank you. I think that you know, we need to turn this crisis into opportunity, because I think we need to call a UN summit, peace summit immediately, and let's get P5, let's get Palestine-Israel all to the table, and let's talk. I think we have to solve this crisis, and then, you know, we are in the 21st century already. We are not, you know, 70, 80 years ago, 40 years ago. So I think it's absolutely important that we all work together and work a solution, and really until the solution is final, we should not really dismiss the meetings.
Comfort.
I agree with everything that's just been said. Ambassador, I hear you quite rightly in terms of what needs to happen next. The most immediate thing, I think, right now is stopping the fighting, getting a ceasefire in place, maybe some talks about hostage exchange. And unfortunately, I think we need to think about some kind of interim arrangement that deals with ending the blockage and thinking about material and infrastructure for Gaza, and then thinking long term. If there's real commitment to two-state solution, Daniel, you're right, but what's fundamental is rights for the Palestinians. Absolutely, I back everything you've just said, Ambassador.
Thank you, Comfort. And I'm going to leave the last word to Mohammed here. Minister, we just talked about there ultimately needing to be a solution to this now. This needs to stop. You guys have been integral in the process of mediating talks between the two parties. You successfully mediated a humanitarian pause, which brought with it the opportunity to get the humanitarian aid that was needed into the country, and indeed the hostages and Palestinian prisoners on the other side released. We talked yesterday to the Prime Minister about what was going on now. He said he was deeply disappointed that the two parties are nothing like as close as they were. What's your sense of the potential for a ceasefire at this point, or at least another humanitarian pause in these efforts? Where are you at in these talks?
So you're always asking me the difficult questions, yeah, I know. So I totally agree with my colleagues on the stage about the importance of the ceasefire. It should always be the #1 priorities for us. This war needs to stop. And that's what we're trying to do as a state here, an effective state in the region. I totally agree about the importance for us to coordinate even further. The international communities need to take up their responsibilities. They are not doing enough. More needs to be done by the important international stakeholders related to the situation in Gaza right now. Let's not get distracted by secondary items. Let us focus on the main item right now in the agenda. It's a ceasefire. It's helping the people over there in Gaza. That's what we're trying to do as a state, and that's why we're engaging with international communities towards.
And with that, we're going to leave it there. We are way over. We thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us. Really good insight. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience.